Resourceful Designer, episode 180, Embracing a Yes Attitude.
Welcome to the Resourceful Designer podcast, offering solutions to streamline your graphic and web design business so you can get back to designing. And now, your host. He was allergic to just about everything as a kid, but not so much now that he's older. Mark Decote.
Welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. I always love it when you decide to spend a little bit of time with me discussing our graphic design business. Now, in this episode, I'm going to talk about saying yes to projects you don't know how to do. I'm going to share a resource of the week that will help you with learning, and I'll end the episode with a question from Christy that ties directly into today's episode topic. Now, what have I been up to lately? Well, I've been fielding a lot of follow-up emails from Podcast Movement. If you listened to me last week, you know that it's been a couple of weeks now I came back from Podcast Movement where I was promoting my new design business or my side gig of podcastbranding.co where I do branding for podcasters. Well, I've gotten several emails from that conference of people I met or people who just picked up my card and are asking me for services. Well, that is great. I've also been asked to revive an old project I did for my local tourism bureau. Now, if you're unaware, I was the lead designer for the tourism bureau. I didn't work for them. They hired me to do their design. And I did designs for them for close to 20 years, going back to my days at the print shop. I was the designer there. They were my client when I was at the print shop. And when I left, they followed me and kept me designing for them. But when they changed, the board of directors changed the manager there, the new manager decided to hire an in-house designer instead of farming it out. And I lost the, I say contract, but there was no actual contract. I lost doing the work. Well, now years later, things have changed there. The tourism board has actually shuffled around and it's not actually the same organization it was before. And the new manager just so happens to be somebody that I used to work closely with at another company. She actually moved from one company to another, and when I worked with her for both of those companies, and now she's in charge of the tourism bureau, and she contacted me about an old project I'd done. This is a huge map of the area I had done many, many years ago, and they want to bring it back, to give it a refresh, update a lot of the information on it. And luckily, because I don't throw anything out, I have all the files still for this. So that sounds like a really fun project. We're getting underway there. I gave them a quote. They agreed to the price. Contract's been signed. Now I'm just waiting for some information to get going on this. So it's a really fun project to work on. And finally, I'm still trying to come up with a name for the Resourceful Designer audience. I mentioned this to you last week, how I'm reading Pat Flynn's Superfans book, and he talks about how great audiences deserve a name. You know, along the lines of Whovians, who are fans of Doctor Who, or the way Justin Bieber has his Beliebers as fans. So what should I call you, a listener of Resourceful Designer? If you have a catchy or fun moniker that you think would be good for the group, email it to me at feedback@resourcefuldesigner.com. And now this week's resource of the week. And this week's resource is your local library. You know, the library is one of those things that when you're a kid, you go, you get excited. Maybe through school and maybe even college, you might need the library for schoolwork, although I understand that the younger generation now with the internet don't really need the library very much. But the library is still a great resource for all sorts of stuff. I was in my local library recently, and they have a whole section on art and design and stuff. So I was looking at some books that I've been wanting for a while for logo design or color theory. And I was able to flip through them. And I didn't take them out at the time because this was before I was going to Podcast Movement. So I didn't want to risk forgetting about them and not returning them because you have to return library books. But it's a great resource just to go and look through and that. Not to mention self-improvement books. And that's what I am getting from them is just books to read to help you grow as a business person, as a general human being. There are all sorts of great self-help books out there, and why go buy them when you can borrow them from your library? Not to mention, go in and ask your library. They have all sorts of other resources they can have. You could even possibly go to your library and put on a seminar or a session. And they often have rooms that they will let you have free of charge where you can put on a presentation and maybe talk to people about branding. And the library will help bring in people. It's another way to get your name out there as a designer. So when was the last time you visited your local library and see what it has to offer? It's a great resource that I think a lot of people are forgetting about. So why don't you check yours out? You never know what you'll find. And now, embracing a yes attitude. I keep a list in Evernote of topic ideas for the podcast. Whenever I hear or see something that triggers an idea for an episode, I jot it down. Then, on weeks when I'm not sure what to talk about, I'll look over my list and see if one of them tickles my fancy. Well, today's topic is one from my list that I've almost done several times before. I've either bumped it because of some sort of fresh new idea that I wanted to talk about, and I decided, okay, I'll save this one for later. Or a lot of times I'd be looking through my list and I'd come across it and maybe something else, and it's like, oh, which one? And I'd end up choosing the other one. And this one was always a close second. Well, no more. It's high time I talk about embracing a yes attitude, especially with some of the discussion threads I've been seeing in various web and design groups on the internet lately. Plus, when I saw Christy's question come in, I thought this is the perfect time to do this episode. And I will be getting to Christy's question at the end of the podcast. Now, more and more, I'm hearing of designers, this is both graphic and web designers, who are actually turning down projects because the job or what the client is asking doesn't fit their skill set. And it frustrates me when I see this. It frustrates me because I've been there. I've done that. When my design business was still fairly new, back in 2005, 2006, I turned down several projects and several clients because I didn't know how to do what they were asking of me. I remember turning down a $50,000 website. That was what the client was coming to me. They said, here's the budget. We're willing to pay $50,000 for this website. And I turned it down because I wasn't comfortable enough with my knowledge of PHP and MySQL. I had been just starting to learn it at that time, and I was having a hard time grasping it. And in the long run, I never did really fully learn it. But because of that, I ended up turning down that project because I wasn't sure if I was capable of doing the job, especially with the little coding skill I had, and I was afraid to try. I've also turned down several jobs in the past that required illustration. I've said it many times on the podcast before, I'm not an illustrator. And back then, when a project requiring illustration came my way, I would just politely turn it down. And what frustrates me now is knowing how much money I turned away and how many possible great clients I ended up not working with because I didn't have the skills for the job, and so I turned them down. And I wish I knew then what I know now. And that is, when you're running a design business, especially as a solopreneur, all by yourself, that doesn't mean you have to do everything yourself. Yes, you should take every opportunity to learn and expand yourself as a designer. But in some cases, the best option is to team up with someone proficient in the skills that you lack. Back in episode 77 of the podcast, I talked about how being a self-employed designer requires a team effort. You can get to that episode by visiting resourcefuldesigner.com/episode 77. And I discussed how every self-employed designer needs to have an arsenal, for lack of a better word, an arsenal of peers and associates with complementing skills to fill in the gaps that you have. And that's where embracing a yes attitude comes in. And it's simple. When a client asks you if you can do something, you say yes, even if you don't know how to do it. Saying yes to one of these projects that you're not sure of can open up amazing doors for you. If it's doable, you can use that project to learn a new skill, something you're lacking, and add it to your repertoire. If it's not something you can do or something you don't necessarily want to learn, you can simply find somebody who can do it for you. When I discovered this years ago, that I didn't have to do everything myself just because it was my business, let me tell you, it propelled my design business by leaps and bounds. I grew so much when I started teaming up with people to do various things. I embraced a yes attitude and stopped turning down jobs on the pretense that I wasn't sure I could do them. Now, I want you to keep in mind that this doesn't mean you should take on every single job presented to you. There are still plenty of valid reasons for turning down projects. What I'm saying is to embrace a yes attitude for projects that sound like fun, sound great, but you're not sure how to do them. If you're hesitant for that reason, don't say no. Say yes. Then figure out how to do them yourself, or figure out who can do them with you. In the past, I've had a client ask me if I could add their logo to a photo. They had a photo of their team in front of a brick wall, and they asked me if I could add their logo on the wall and make it look like a neon sign. I've had a client ask me if I could create a realistic looking 3D type and make it look like it was on fire, like a realistic looking fire, like it was burning. I've had a client ask me to create a title heading for their poster, and they wanted the words for the title to look like they were made out of realistic stacked ice cubes. Neon signs, burning type made out of ice? I didn't have the foggiest idea of how to do any of these things when I took on these jobs. But when they asked me, I said, yes, I can do that. And you know what? I figured out how to do each one. You don't need to know how to do something beforehand in order to get it done. You can learn along the way. I've had clients ask me for e-commerce websites before I was doing WordPress, and now it's easy to do. I've had clients ask me for illustrations. I've had clients ask me for video work. In each of these cases, I found somebody who can do those things for me because it's not something I either can or wanted to do. Nowadays, e-commerce, I can do them with WordPress, but before I was doing WordPress, again, that had to do with PHP, MySQL, and I wasn't comfortable with it. So when I had a client ask me to incorporate an e-commerce section onto his website, I just found somebody capable of doing it and hired them to do it for me. So saying yes to a client doesn't mean you have to do it yourself. It just means you have to get it done. Remember, as a designer, you are a problem solver. It's your job to provide a solution to what your client wants or needs. Solution. That's the key word there. A solution indicates that the answer is unknown, that the answer has to be discovered. And this applies to every single design challenge out there. When you are given a design project, the outcome is unknown. You have to find the proper solution to it. So the same way that the answer or the solution is unknown, the skills and the knowledge required to complete a project may be unknown at the start as well. And part of finding the overall solution to the design problem may be trying to figure out how you're going to get something done and learn the skills that you don't know how to do. Say yes, and then find the solution. And by saying yes, you end up adding to your skill set. You end up adding to your repertoire. You can possibly be adding to your portfolio, depending if the project's good enough. And of course, you are adding to your reputation as a designer. And to all the designers out there that feel like saying yes to something and then getting somebody else to do it is actually deceitful to their clients. And I do know there are some designers out there who think that way because I see them in these discussion threads and Facebook groups and other places. I see them commenting saying, oh, I would never do that because, the client hires me. They want me to do everything. Believe me, a client doesn't care if it was you or one of your team members that did it, as long as they're happy with the outcome. Think of it this way. Imagine you need surgery. Well, you're going to want to know who the doctor performing the surgery is. But no surgeon ever performs surgery on their own, alone. They always have a team around them, a team that's assisting them doing the things that the doctor either can't or shouldn't be doing. Well, the same goes for your design business. You're the design surgeon, if you will. The client is hiring you. They don't need to know who your team is because they're putting their trust in you. They trust you to make sure the project is done. As long as you deliver, they'll be happy and they'll keep coming back, regardless of whether you did the project or you had a team member do it. And all of this is possible because you embraced a yes attitude. And as I said earlier, when I decided to embrace a yes attitude and started taking on projects that I wasn't sure of or knew that I didn't have the skill set and learnt, I expanded my business so much. And I know that I wouldn't be in the position I am today if not for that. So I encourage you to embrace a yes attitude. Now, I would love to know, if you already do embrace a yes attitude, what was the last project you took on that you didn't have the skill set for? Leave me a comment for this episode by visiting resourcefuldesigner.com/episode 180. And now, the question of the week. Now, of course, I teased this one a couple of times in the episode. This one comes in from Christy, and she says, I have a question. Many times, when I'm asked to do a new project, there are elements of the projects that I don't know how to do. One guy needs a video along with his marketing. Another needs illustration, etc. My experience is designing websites, brochures, email, mailers, and I don't feel I'm very good with logos. I also don't know video, have a great camera, or know how to do the behind the scenes of a website. All of these things would have been done for me at companies I've worked at before, and my freelance projects have been so random that I'm constantly learning new skills. It's nice, but sometimes I don't know what to do in these scenarios since I don't know a lot of other freelancers. Can you recommend some resources or best practices? I'm just starting out. Thanks for your awesome podcast. Well, thank you very much for the question, Christy. And as you can see how this ties into today's episode, embracing a yes attitude of taking on work even when you're not comfortable with it. Christy already knows this, but she doesn't know who to turn to. Well, Christy, the best answer I can say is the way I did this is anytime I would meet somebody, if they were an illustrator, if they were, say, a web developer, or they worked on e-commerce, or they worked on video, I would either ask for a card or copy their name down. The way I did it is in my contacts on my map or on my phone, I have the contacts app. I would put their name down, and in the notes section, I would write down what they did. And I did this for translators because I often need stuff translated into French, or copywriters, or anything. And I would keep track of these, illustrators and all. And then when the time came, I would just look through my list of people that I knew or I'd talked to before and find out if they were capable. Now, the thing is when you do reach out to somebody like this, they might not be capable, but now you're talking in their space. So they may know somebody that they can refer you to. So say for video, for example, if you contact somebody for video because you're looking for something and it's not the type of video work they do, there's a good chance they'll know somebody that they can recommend. Now, that was before when I wasn't really searching the internet. Now, I still do that. Whenever I go somewhere, like say there's a Comic-Con or something, and there's always illustrators showing their work, I'll get their information because every once in a while I'll want an illustrator for a certain thing. But what I've been doing lately is just turning online. The last project that I needed an illustrator for, I went to Fiverr. Illustration is one of the things that I don't mind Fiverr. I don't agree with their principle for designs or logos because too many things can be stolen. But if you need an illustration, it's pretty hard for them to steal something, especially if you're very specific for it. So I've hired illustrators from all over the world, depending on the illustration style that I was searching for. Now, when it comes to technical things, I would turn to a website such as Upwork. Upwork has a ton of very talented people in all sorts of niches and industries and businesses that you can think of. So, for example, back when I said that in this episode, I talked about an e-commerce site that I needed, and this was before I got into WordPress. And it was done on, I think the platform was called PrestaShop or PrestoShop or something like that. I had no idea what to do. So I went on, and it's called Upwork now. At the time, it was Elance. I went on to Elance, and I found somebody who was a specialist in that platform, and I hired them to help me set it up. So, and Elance and Odesk were the two back then. They merged, and they're now Upwork. But you can find stuff there. Or if you're a member of a group, say the Resourceful Designer group or any other group, logo, you say you're not good with logo? Well, there's a Logo Geek group that is full of logo designers. And when you need something, you can just reach out there. And if you have a design brief, you can say, listen, I have a design brief. Here's the budget I have. I'm willing to spend X amount of dollars. And this is something that you would do with your client. know roughly how much the client wants to spend. And then, of course, you're going to want to keep a little bit of it. So say the client, I'll just use a nice round figure. Say the client says, I'm willing to spend $1,000 on a logo. And you say, well, I want to keep 200 of that. Well, then you put out a brief saying, I'm willing to spend $800 on a logo. And I'm sure that you would find somebody in there that would be willing to do it. Now, you've got to vet these people. You got to ask for samples, look at their portfolio, make sure that they would work out. But there are all sorts of places to find these people. So to name them all again, today, right now, if I had to find somebody, my first choice would be Fiverr. And I know a lot of people are going, oh, Fiverr, I don't want to support them. But when it comes to certain things, Fiverr is really good. I do not like them for design work, but for illustration, I've got no problems with Fiverr. There's also, if you need to do some video work, just some simple things where you're providing the stuff, you just need it put together, Fiverr is a great place for that. The other place, again, is Upwork. Those are the two that I would use. I know there's many other. There's TopTal. I can't even think. There's many other places, but those are the two that I'm familiar with because they're the ones that I would go to. The other thing that you could try, Christy, is depending on what it is you need, you can contact your local design school. I've done this many times. I would contact the dean or the teacher there, and I would say, I have this sort of project. I need somebody. Do you have a student that is capable of this, that would like some work maybe for their portfolio to get this done? And I have done this many times. And the students are great because, yes, they want something in their portfolio that will really stand out. They want real world work as opposed to just school work. So it gives them experience and it gets them something that they can add to their resume, that they actually did freelance work for your company. Now, again, I always go through the teacher or the dean in this case because they know which students are best at what. So when I say I need this, I would go to them and let them choose. I would never just put an ad out or something to the students because you never know what sort of talent you'll get that way. So I hope that answers your question, Christy, along with the rest of this episode when I was talking about the whole embracing a yes attitude. If not, send me another email and we can discuss it a little bit further amongst ourselves. But I thought your question tied in very nicely with the topic for today. So thank you very much for that. Now, if you would like your question answered on a future episode of the podcast, it's very easy to get that done. Simply visit resourcefuldesigner.com/feedback and submit yours. Now, can I ask you a favor? I know iTunes or Apple podcast reviews are not really important in the grand scheme of things, but I would love to know if you want to leave a review, instead of just saying a great podcast, which I love getting those, I would really like to know what sort of value, what did you learn from the podcast? And if you put it in the review form, then other people finding the podcast can see those and it might entice them to listen to the podcast as well. So if you could think of something I've helped you with while you're listening to an episode, it would be great if you can leave a review in Apple Podcasts for it. Now, the easiest way to get there is to simply visit resourcefuldesigner.com/iTunes. I know I have to update that link. But if you go resourcefuldesigner.com/iTunes, that'll redirect you to the Resourceful Designer page where you can then leave your review. So thank you very much for that. And while you're at it, if you want to share the podcast with any of your design friends, let them know that it's available just about everywhere. And it's gaining a lot of traction on Spotify right now. So thank you if you're listening from Spotify. I really, really appreciate you. So that's it for this episode. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'm glad you stuck around till the end, get all the knowledge out of this. And I look forward to discussing our design business with you again next week. Until then, I am Mark Decote, wishing you all the best with your graphic design business and reminding you to stay creative.
Thanks for listening to the Resourceful Designer Podcast at resourcefuldesigner.com.